Jessica, presumably by Selnax. I love Pokémon. I always have and I always will. Not just the game, but the characters themselves. When I was about 6, my dad bought me my first ever games console. A yellow Game Boy Color console with a copy of Pokémon Yellow. I was overjoyed. I had been a hardcore Pokémon fan ever since I started watching the TV shows with my brother and some friends, and every time I would start trying to reenact some Pokémon. Due to my young age and naive nature, I didn't know it was just a kids show and a game. My brother was with me, and his colorless Game Boy, the see-through one that shows all the funky machinery inside of it, had a copy of Pokémon Blue. I would have gotten a red, but they were out of stock. My brother began his game, along with me, in the car on the way to my grandmother's house, and we were both instantly hooked. I fell in love with Pikachu instantly, and my mind being naive at a young age made me call it a weird name. Thinking of a girl who I knew who moved recently, a very close friend of ours, I named my Pikachu Jessica as a tribute to her. I got to Pewter City and I had a Butterfree and a Pidgey already, similar to Ash in the cartoon. I had to turn it off and begged Dad to buy me new batteries to keep playing, but it was safe to say that I was hooked. After time, my team grew stronger. It changed, expanding itself and now replacing Butterfree and Pidgeotto with Sandslash and Gororo, a Dragonite traded to me from my brother. As well as the two of them, my team also added in the Charmander, Squirtle, and Bulbasaur you get during the game. However, one Pokemon never changed throughout the game: Jessica. She remained on my team throughout the game. I didn't mind that she was a little weaker than my other Pokemon because she wasn't evolved. She held a special place in my heart. Somehow, no matter how many times my brother tried convincing me to evolve her into a Raichu, which was impossible in my game, by trading her to him and let him do it, I never did. I liked Jessica just the way she was, and kept training her along with my other Pokemon, hearing the cute Pika as she went into battle and the little animations when I spoke to her. In fact, she was the first Pokemon on my team to reach level 100. My first ever top-level Pokemon, the first Pokemon I'd ever gotten. My dad told me I was a little too into the game, but I saw differently. I saw Jessica as more than just pixels and bytes in a video game. I saw her as a close friend, a companion, and someone who would cheer me up when I was down with her Pika Pika every time I pressed the A button on her. In a sense, I began to love Jessica like a friend, as weird as it sounded. Soon, Pokemon Gold and Silver came out. I traded my yellow team to my Pokemon Silver version, and trained on that one, even getting them all to level 100 too. Jessica still remained at the head of my party along with my yellow team and my new Pokemon Silver team. I remember watching the anime in Johto, and Ash said that he valued all of his Pokemon and treated them like family. I value my Pokemon in the same way, and Jessica felt like a little sister I never had. My brother had a tendency to just restart his game when he got bored. I even got Pokemon Red to try and match him, and we even had races together. He and I battled occasionally, and he often won, but he could never match up to my Pokemon Yellow team. One day, however, one of our younger friends came around and messed with my game without me knowing. He didn't erase it, but he accidentally evolved Jessica into a Raichu. Since it was on my new Crystal version, she couldn't refuse like she did in Yellow. I felt gutted, and a little sad that some of my past had died. To relive some nostalgic moments, I traded my team back to Yellow and began to fight some Pokemon with my team, my love for it being back. Although Jessica wasn't following me around anymore, I still treated her like the Pikachu I always had. I even spoke to my game a few times, and once or twice I thought she responded to me. If I felt happy, the Raichu's cry was normal and tough, and if I felt sad, it slowed down and a little saddened. It might have just been me, but oh well. When Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire came out, I was distraught that I couldn't trade Gen 1, Gen 2 Pokemon to them. I felt incredibly sad and finally put down my Pokemon Yellow to pick up a copy of Pokemon Ruby. So what if it was an American on a British Game Boy? I began to play and was instantly hooked. I made a new team, but every now and again I went back to my old games. Jessica still made me come back to Yellow, and her Pikachu on the front page sprite always made me happy to see her again. Unfortunately, my life outside of my video games was becoming less fortunate. My mother was getting sick and slowly dying of cancer. The doctors tried everything they could and fought to keep her alive, but everyone knew the end was coming, except me. I was so naive that I never even understood half of what was going on. Sure, I knew Mom was ill, but then the inevitable happened and it finally smacked me in the face. I closed myself to reality, playing games and forcing everyone away from me. My thoughts were so misguided and far-fetched. My mind was being distorted and I was doing incredibly badly on my games, even if I was trying to use them as a failsafe. Ruby was no fun anymore, and most of my other games were just plain rubbish. Super Smash Bros. Melee kept me entertained for a while, but soon even that got dull. The only thing left for me now was Yellow. Somehow, as a failsafe, Jessica and Yellow actually worked. She always seemed to cheer me up, even as a Raichu, and her tough battle cry made me keep going forward. I met a girl online and began to fall in love with her. She helped me through several hard times, and was also a great Pokémon fan. I got Pearl, and soon after began to play that, getting hints and tips from this new friend, who will be known as S to protect her identity, and making a new team, buying Pokémon Battle Revolution soon after and battling her on it occasionally. Everything was getting back together, until one fateful event. One event that would, to me unknowingly, set off a whole chain reaction. I came home from school incredibly angry. People at school had been bullying me, and a friend had turned on me and seriously upset me. In a blind rage, I had stormed into my room and began throwing things around. My bag, books, drawers, everything that wasn't secure. Eventually, I calmed down and began to tidy up, removing things from a pile I had made of heavy objects being thrown. I heard an odd crunching and crackling noise. Digging everything away, I found something that made my anger dissipate into nothing. There, crushed at the bottom of the pile, was a yellow cartridge for a Game Boy Color game. I had only one yellow Game Boy Color game, and that was the game I started with. Yellow. I cried. I think I really cried for quite some time, just holding the smashed bits of my game to my chest. No more nostalgic battles with the Elite Four, no more battles with my rival, no more Jessica. The Pikachu to Raichu I had grown to love as a good friend and almost as a sister. I felt bad and guilty, but even still, I had other Pokémon games. I had Pearl with an amazing team on it, and I was soon going to get Platinum. Would I really miss a Pokémon game that was about 7 or 8 years old? I wish I had paid more attention. I was far too blind and naive. I began to play Pearl more frequently, challenging S to battles as well as my friends. I moved to a new school and got Platinum, but my depression kept coming back to haunt me. My brother too was suffering from depression from the death of our mother, and neither of us were getting any better. Well, I was stable thanks to S, who had now become my girlfriend, but my brother was worse off. My brother wasn't even going to school anymore. He had lost interest in Pokemon and gone to other fandoms, but I stayed loyal. I still am, to this very day, the #1 Pokemon fan in my school. However, whenever I played Pokemon games, something lingered at the back of my mind. Something that I had forgotten. Something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Whatever it was, I seemed to get this feeling whenever I saw a member of the Chu family in the anime or the games. It was odd. And a little creepy. A year and a half later, approximately 6 months ago from today, another tragedy struck. My brother, who had slowly been sinking lower and lower into depression, died in his flat suddenly. No one told me anything about what happened, but it was enough. My depression came back like a storm and smacked me. A few days later, I was due to go back to school. I was rummaging through old things that would bring back memories of my brother. Digging in a box, I found a cracked object. Pulling it out, I was surprised to see my old Pokemon Yellow cartridge. There was a large chunk of it missing from the front, and a lot of nuts and bolts inside of it were loose and tipped all over the bottom of the box. I took all of them and attempted to find the lost piece of the cover, but to no avail. Finally giving up, I placed it back into the box and put it away. As I did, a name flashed into my mind that made me pause. Jessica. Where had I heard that name before? I couldn't remember. I stuffed it back under my computer desk and left for school. Things weren't going very well after my brother's death. My mind was going wrong. I was soon hearing voices in my head, and I was diagnosed with minor multiple personality disorder. Pokemon Heart Gold, my most recent game, along with S and my 2 friends, known to you as P and R, were the only things keeping me sane. Soon enough, P suggested I get the new Pokemon games, Pokemon Black and White. I decided to get Black because I liked the look of the white dragon Reshiram. He said he would get white and we would race to see who beat the game first, just like me and my brother would have done. Soon, the game came and we went instantly to playing it. Within 3 days, I was already with 7 badges and a full team. My love for Pokemon would never die, and P was left in the dust with only 4 badges. Finally beating the game and getting the transfer machine, I borrowed P's DS and began to scroll through some Pokemon to trade for my Heart Gold. I wanted to replace Lightning, my Zebstrika, and Wildfire, my Simisear, because they were far too weak. Looking through, I came across a Pikachu that I had gotten from the Yellow Forest Pokewalker run. It was female, had a modest nature, knew Surf, Volt Tackle, and 2 other moves I can't remember. Perfect. As a tradition of mine, I always name my Pokemon. This helps me put characteristics to them, and I had done so ever since I could remember. My Heart Gold file was loaded and I took the Pikachu to the name raider. Pikachu seemed like the only real worthy one of being on my team. I'd already decided to replace Simisear with another Unova Pokemon. As I went to nickname her, I had a discussion with the other 2 voices in my head to ask what to call her. As we were talking, my stylus tapped absent-mindedly on the screen without me realizing it. As I came back to focus from the conversation with my 2 counterparts, I realized that my dawdling had made me press enter. I rolled my eyes and went to look at the probably silly name I had made. Congratulations! From now on, this Pokemon will be known as Jessica. Jessica. My eyes widened as I recognized the name from somewhere. Where? I didn't remember, but it seemed to fit. Everything from there went smoothly. We decided to stick with the name and sent Jessica to my black and play that weird capture game thing. It took me 2 tries to do it, but I finally got my Pokemon to black. Jessica was shifted to the front of my party, and I began to train her. Things were going as planned. The Lucky Egg and Experience Point-Up power I was using for my Sea-Gear were working great. I changed her moveset to be a bit more special-oriented, she had a modest nature, and kept on training. Things started getting strange about 30 minutes after she was in the game. I had started training Jessica without an experience boost, and had just gotten her to level 50. Level 50 was the level I was planning to evolve her into a Raichu. I pressed A twice to get rid of the stats, and then a 3rd time to get rid of the winning battle message. However, rather than the screen going back to normal, it stayed black for a few seconds. Thinking my game had crashed, I pressed the A button once or twice. A black message box appeared on the screen, as if I had received an item, but the text was going slowly, and what was displayed made me frown. Remember me? I blinked. I didn't know what this was. The text box vanished and the screen returned to normal. I guess it was just some odd glitch for an event, maybe a joke they did since Pikachu was the main Pokemon in the first games? Chuckling a little at a possible gag, I went to my pack and took a Thunderstone, going to click on Jessica. However, rather than the page being replaced by Jessica evolving, a text box appeared, this time the text moving at normal speed. Jessica is refusing to take the stone. Refusing? I was confused. A Pokemon had never done that to me. Except one. Maybe it was a gag again, back to the old Pokemon game? Sighing, I closed the bag and began to walk around a bit more, training again. Jessica raised a few more levels until she was level 60, and then I tried the Thunderstone. Again, Jessica refused, but this time as I closed the bag, another message appeared. Black text box, slow white writing like before. It's not going to work. Now do you remember me? This was starting to creep me out a little. I saved the game and then checked Jessica's stats. On the status screen, her stats seemed normal. Level 60, modest nature, holding a lucky egg, female. But something was different. It took me a few seconds to notice what it was. The Pokemon sprite usually moves on the status screen, but Jessica's was unmoving. The Pikachu was sat there, staring intently at the screen, and she didn't look happy like all the other Pikachu did. In fact, she looked angry. Her head was crouched a little, and her eyes were narrowed, her cheeks sparking occasionally. She hadn't been like that when I had first gotten her. Worried that it could be Pokerus or some form of equivalent, I took her to a Pokemon Center to see if that little message saying, "You have Pokerus" came up. When I spoke to Nurse Joy, she healed my Pokemon and then began to say something else, but what she said wasn't what I was expecting. "Oh my, it seems your Jessica isn't very pleased with you. Did you do something to upset it? You should take better care of your Pokemon." I read the screen over and over, trying to understand what I had done wrong. Was this all a side effect of some glitch involving Pikachu and Thunderstones? Alarm bells were going off in my head. My two other voices were screaming at me to be careful, but I wanted to get Jessica to be a higher level to battle the champion and my friend, and so I began to train again. Once she had reached level 65, I checked back on her sprite. Jessica's sprite had gone back to normal, but something was different. Whereas the Pikachu sprite normally bounced, Jessica did not, and it seemed to be looking at me, her eyes locking onto mine, quietly. The detailed brown eyes filled with emotion I never knew could be seen in a game. Hatred, anger, resentment, sorrow. They were not happy eyes. As I closed her status page, another message flashed up. You're a liar. A cruel, heartless killer. Killer? I stared at the screen. I knew something was wrong. I quickly grabbed my DS and hurried upstairs in my school to find P and R, both of them in the upstairs lounge. I showed them the game, but as soon as I turned the DS to show them, the message would replace itself with Jessica's stats screen. I told them to listen to me and begged them to understand, but the two of them were talking about something else, and thought I was just going nuts and being stupid. I resigned myself to possibly thinking that too, and headed back downstairs to my room, continuing to train. As soon as I opened my DS back up, words were at the bottom of the screen in a slightly larger than normal text box. Those words were worrying, however, since it was still in the black text box, but the words themselves were blood red and in a different style of writing, much more blocky and sharp than the rounded edges of the newer writing. You kept me close. We were the best of friends. Then you broke me, killed me, and then discarded me. I will never die. I'm too close to your heart. Jessica's sprite appeared on the screen, but it was different again. Instead of a happy bouncing Pikachu, her arms were folded and her ears were drooping downwards. Her eyes narrowed and her body had turned so that it was now facing the screen directly. It was then that I really understood. She wasn't talking to the character at all. She was talking to me. Jessica? I whispered, staring at her quietly. The Pikachu's sprite nodded angrily, and its mouth began to move silently as words appeared on the screen in the same blood-red digital writing. I thought you cared. I thought you really cared. Wasn't I special to you, Cameron? Wasn't I your best friend? A yes-no selection box appeared. I lingered, memories slowly beginning to hit my head, as the other two voices in my head remained silent, probably just as shocked as I was. Fingers trembling, I selected yes. Jessica nodded on screen before her tail flicked and her mouth began to move again. Yes, we were partners, you and I. We took down Team Rocket together. We conquered Kanto, Johto, even Red together. I thought you cared, but I was wrong. You let rage get the better of you and snapped me like a twig. You crushed me as well as my heart. You killed me. You're a murderer, Cameron. No, I cried, not realizing I was talking aloud. Jessica, I'm sorry, I really am. I could feel tears beginning to stream down my face. You've got it all wrong. There was a silence from the screen before I suddenly heard Pika from the speakers. I looked at the screen to see that she had turned her back to me and begun to walk away. I shook my head, frantically pressing the A button to try and do something, but all I got was a swish of her lightning bolt tail as she faded out. The screen returned to normal, and Black, the character, was facing a Pikachu sprite at the top of some steps. I guessed that this was Jessica, and the little Pikachu block looked at Black before another text box appeared. At the top of Celestial Tower, I will wait for you. With that, the screen flashed black, and then back to normal. Things were wrong, though. The music had stopped playing, and Black seemed to be moving slightly slower than normal. When I checked my party Pokémon, the first thing I noticed was that Jessica was no longer in my party. The first space was replaced by my starter, Wish, my Samurott. Looking over my Pokémon, I noticed some other things. Their cries were not sounded, and their sprites were frozen. The sprites themselves were also only done in certain monochrome colors, yellow, red, blue, and whatnot, as well as done in large blocky pixels. Just like Pokemon Yellow sprites. Everything suddenly hit me. Jessica, my old team, the nostalgia, and finally, what had happened to the cartridge. Without another word, in real life or in-game, I used my trusty Siglief high node to fly to Mistralton City and head towards the Celestial Tower. The music still refused to play, but I was in too much torment with myself to care. The two voices in my head were trying to reassure me that this was some kind of nightmare, but I knew it was all happening. It was also real, and my throat was incredibly dry. My tears still ran down my face as I entered the tower. The tower of the deceased Pokémon. Pokémon Tower. As soon as I entered, the atmosphere was different from outside. The room was darker than normal, and there wasn't anybody there. There was a forlorn silence, but faintly, music was playing. I began to ascend the spiral staircase, and the music got louder with every floor I raised. Each floor was how it should be, but much darker and with no trainers or wild Pokémon. The graves were painted black, and on the final staircase, I saw Cameron used rage. Jessica died. In block red capital letters, spiraling up the stairs, one letter on each second step. I finally reached the top, and surprisingly found everybody there. All of the trainers from the tower, the gym leaders, Elite Four, Belle, Sharon, N, Alder, they were all here, looking towards the main steps to the bell at the top of the tower. What they said was what shocked me, and made my throat dry out even more and fresh tears well up in my eyes. Cameron, how could you do such a thing? I looked up to you. How could you betray me? This is unforgivable, but maybe she will. You said you wanted people and Pokémon to live in peace. Then why did you... As I rose to the final few steps, Belle, Sharon, N, and Alder all followed, blocking the way back out. I went forward and stopped. There, standing in front of the bell, was undeniably a Raichu sprite. The Raichu rang the bell, the sound sounding eerie with the music, which I now recognized as the 8-bit Lavender Town music from Pokémon Yellow. The music suddenly stopped, and another text bubble appeared, black with white writing. You came, Cameron. I did. I whispered quietly to the screen, sniffing as I stared at it. The Raichu sprite turned around and took a few steps towards Black, only stopping 1 or 2 spaces away. Do you know why I wanted to call you here? A yes-no box appeared. I pressed yes with shaking thumbs, and the Raichu shook its head in response. No, you didn't. Don't lie. I called you here, so you can see what you did to me. The sprite took another final few steps towards Black, and the screen fuzzed out, the larger sprite replacing most of the screen, like when N sometimes talked. What I saw, however, made me sick. It was a Raichu, but no Raichu I had ever seen. The creature's ears were flattened to its skull, a huge gash leading from one ear to the other across the forehead. Blood-stained fur was shown all the way down its face, past its sorrowful eyes and scratched cheeks. Its arms hung limply at its sides, and its tail drooped limply over its shoulder, the lightning bolt at the tip of it having had a large chunk ripped out of it. The Raichu's mouth had dried blood around the lips, and some still dribbling from the corner of its mouth. But it was the main part of the Raichu that terrified me. Right where the chest was, the abdomen and stomach area of the Raichu too, there was a gaping wound. Inside could be seen intestines, bones, cracked ribs, and copious amounts of blood dripping from it, covering the white belly fur and staining it red. I could see its heart, with a sickening turn of my stomach. I saw it beating feebly within the shattered ribcage. Panicking, I pressed A repeatedly to try and get the image away from the screen. Instead, a text box appeared, the writing digital and red, just like the blood coming from the Raichu. What's wrong, Cameron? Can't stomach what you did to me? Your closest friend? The one who you so mercilessly killed? I'm sorry, I screamed suddenly, staring at the Raichu's face. I'm sorry! With that, I crumpled over the screen and sobbed. Jessica, it was an accident. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to do anything to you. You're still my Pokémon. You're still my closest friend. None of this was meant to happen, Jess. Don't hate me. It was all a stupid accident. I cried for a solid few minutes before finally looking at the screen. Jessica had gone, and the overworld Raichu sprite was simply standing there, looking at black. Nothing was said for a moment, and I simply stared at the screen. Finally, a text box appeared. Was it truly an accident? A yes/no box appeared. I pressed yes, and there was another pause. The Raichu sprite turned around and walked back to the bell before another text box appeared. Do you regret what you did? Another yes/no box appeared. I frantically pressed yes, more tears making their way down my face. There was another pause before Jessica finally turned around, staring at black. Jessica believes you. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I saw the Raichu sprite walk back over to black. The screen flashed up with the gruesome Raichu sprite again, but this time the sorrowful eyes were replaced with soft ones, a small, weak smile on its face. Do you still love me? There was no yes/no box, but instead, it asked if I wanted to record or check mic options. I knew my DS microphone was fine, so I pressed record and took a deep breath. Jessica, I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I wish I could reverse what I put you through. I should never have forgotten. You're not just a bunch of pixels and data, but a being, just like me. I'm really sorry. I promise I'll never do it again. Ever. I'll be more careful. I'll never restart a Pokemon game. Ever. All I want... I took a soft breath and finally let the words out. Is for you to forgive my stupidity. I do still love you, Jessica. A picture of Jessica on screen nodded, and it faded out. The overworld returned, and Jessica appeared again as a Raichu sprite. This time, however, Black spun in a circle, and a small Pokeball flew from his hand. A flash of white light engulfed Jessica, and the ball closed. As Black moved forward to pick it up, a new text box appeared. Thank you, Cameron. You really do remember. I smiled at the screen, and as I did, Sharon, Belle, N, and Alder all walked up to Black and surrounded him. The screen faded out, and Black reappeared in front of the bell. He rang the bell, and the usual message appeared. Instead of what normally happens, however, Black walked away from the bell with the screen still focused on it. As it faded, I saw a few ghost silhouettes. A Charizard, a Blastoise, a Venusaur, a Sandslash, and a Dragonite. All of my old Pokemon Yellow team had been laid to rest in the Celestial Tower, never returning, but never being forgotten. The screen blacked out and returned me to Mistralton City. A message popped up saying that the game had been saved. I checked my Pokemon and saw Jessica in my 6th slot. Opening her page, a huge wave of nostalgia and comfort greeted me, and my 2 other voices as we looked at the screen. Greeting us was a level 100 Raichu, modest nature, female, and with the nickname Jessica, and OT as Cam, which was my Pokemon Yellow character's name. Moving to the moves section, I saw that her stats were exactly how they were left in Yellow, and her moveset was the exact same as her old Yellow moveset. Thunderbolt, Double Team, Submission, and Surf. I smiled broadly. She had forgiven me and decided to join me once again. As I pressed B to leave the page, one final message popped up. A large Raichu picture appeared again, but this time there were no cuts or internal organs shown. What was shown was the smiling face of a healthy Raichu beaming at the screen. A message box popped up as the Raichu's mouth moved as if it was saying the words. Thank you, Cameron, for taking me back. Oh, and by the way, the screen changed briefly. The picture now had one paw up, and I saw something in her paw that made my eyes widen and show no matter how much anyone would prove otherwise, this was no joke or hack. In her paw sat the final missing part of my Pokemon Yellow cartridge. I never truly forgot you either. I hope you read this and realize, to us, it may seem a game, but Jessica taught me that if you love a game too much, it becomes a part of you, so much that you can't leave it behind. I have never ever restarted or broken a Pokemon game since. I am careful with all my games. I don't want to upset anybody like Jessica ever again. I'm glad she was so forgiving and loving of me. If she wasn't, It could have ended so much worse. That was the much-requested Jessica. Final thoughts? Massive disappointment. I want to start off by saying that the first 5 pages of this story were just amazing. Amazing character development, interesting plot, great build-up, just fantastically done. That is, everything leading up to the 6th page. The 6th page when we get into the remember me cliché bullshit. I know what some people might say. They might say that the remember me stuff might not have been cliché back when this was written. Thing is, you can't even say the remember me stuff was new back when the story was written and try and defend it. Tons of remember me stories were written back before the 5th generation of Pokémon even existed. I was reading Creepypasta back when Pokémon Creepy Black first started to go viral. Creepy Black was the first Pokémon Creepypasta to really hit big. The 5th generation of Pokémon hadn't even been announced yet, and that's why people nowadays refer to it as Creepy Black. Because it used to just be called Pokémon Black, but now Pokémon Black is an actual game. This remember me stuff had been hackneyed and cliché for more than a year before this story could have even been written. This is quickly followed by extremely unbelievable things like redrawn sprites that actually have redrawn animation for sparking cheeks. Another problem, the story's portrayal of multiple personality disorder is incredibly inaccurate. As someone who's lived with someone who is bipolar 1 for 20 years, as well as being someone who suffers from cerebral palsy, I've studied a lot about different mental disorders. I understand that the author just wanted a plot device to keep things going, but not only could many other things have worked in its place, it could have just been removed entirely and the plot would still work. You can have serious things like multiple personality disorder in the story as long as it's handled well, but this wasn't handled well at all. It's borderline offensive, and it's not easy to offend me. Once it gets to the part where showing anybody else the Game Boy causes it to change the message to the normal status screen, there are only 2 possibilities. Either this is one of those stories where the game is haunted, or the main character is just insane and seeing things. However, since we're not given any hint that it could all just be in his head due to the disorder, we're left to believe this is all just magic. By the point in the story where Jessica starts directly talking to the narrator in blood-red text is about when the story goes into full tailspin, spiraling directly at the ground and becoming unsalvageable. Just as this is followed by an extremely predictable yes-no option where the narrator selects yes only for the Pokemon to not believe him, is at the same time the author tries to salvage the tail-spinning plane by leaping out of it. Unfortunately, his parachute, that we will now refer to as the plot, has far too many holes in it and is shredded apart by the air pressure. This is also around the time I started hamming it up and doing silly soap opera voices for the story, because the story has gotten so ridiculous that it might as well be a soap opera. Soon after, the author starts explaining the many monochrome colors, despite how monochrome, by definition, is almost entirely black, gray, and white. This is also when the author, already in a panic from noticing his parachute had been torn, that below him was not dirt or water, but a salt flat that will no doubt burn the wounds on impact. As this happens, I am face-desking at how bad this story is getting. As the author writes Pokémon Tower, completing the ultimate cliché of having Lavender Town because it's a cheap way to seem spooky, is at the same time the falling narrator's body weight shifts, not landing on his neck for a quick painless death, but instead landing and crippling his legs on the salt flat, horribly burning and shattering his legs. I want you to keep in mind that until page 6 of this story, this was just a smooth, perfectly enjoyable plane ride. That is, until the author decided to dump gravel into the turbine. As the author starts describing how there's lettering on all of the stairs because, ooh, spooky, and everyone on Earth asks how the fuck could you see it if it's an overhead game, and the author already explained that the tower had the same layout, meaning the stairs could not have writing on them as they are just a doorway-like transition. The author also manages to drag his body over to an oasis, yes, an oasis in a salt flat, only to find that it's full of battery acid. Of course, he does not find out until after he tries to clean his wounds with it. Soon after, we are told that the Lavender Town theme started playing, as I personally teleport into the story with my mutant powers given to me by a bolt of Energy X, as I drag the author out of the acid, only to start absolutely wailing on him with hammering blows straight to the face. The author then starts describing gore in great detail in a cheap and failing attempt to be creepy when all it accomplishes is making a few people grossed out and making me punch harder. After a few pages of just generic, boring, and badly written wrap-up, I start to walk away. As I do this, the author pulls out the worst ending I've ever seen, having the Pokémon hold up the missing piece of the yellow cartridge, showing that the Pokémon actually stole something from the material world and took it into the video game, being the final anvil that broke the camel's back, causing me to come back and finish the job, exploding his head like a sledgehammer to a watermelon with a Ric Flair knee drop. This is, without a doubt, the worst Pokémon creepypasta I have ever read in my life. I have read ones that were boring. I have read ones that were illiterate. I have read ones that were rip-offs. But I've never read one that I had such high hopes for, that was just an amazing page-turner of a story, until it just slammed into a brick wall, and for the entire second half of the story got dumber and dumber, with the worst plot points you could possibly think of. I was told by many people that this story was great, and the first half was great, then it just went to shit. I know I'm going to get a lot of people who still enjoy this story, and I guess I can see why, but I don't think I'm gonna get very much hate for what I'm saying. You guys aren't blind, and you aren't stupid. You can see the stuff is really cliché. You can see the plot points are stupid. Some of you just have different things they value over others when it comes to stories. The actual words flowed well, and it's clearly well thought out, and it was proofread as I only caught one grammatical error. However, the plot points and clichés were just horrendous by a point. I can see why you might like it, but I stand by what I said. This is the worst Pokémon creepypasta I've ever read because it got my hopes up so high with a good beginning just to drop them and stomp them into the dirt. That's it for this story in the last episode of a Creepypasta a Day week. Thank you all so much for your continued support of my channel and for getting me past my 2,000 subscriber mark. Remember that I'll still keep doing my creepypasta every single Saturday, and that the ones I'll be doing will be the ones that are fan-made over on the creepypasta section of my forum. You can find that forum and a link in the description of this video. You'll also find a link to the playlist of every single creepypasta I've read, in case you're interested in seeing more. Since most of what I've read are fan-made ones specifically for this show, expect to see a lot of stories that you've never seen before. I'd also very much appreciate if you checked out the other links in the description to my other social outlets, if you're interested in keeping up with me. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, sweet dreams.